Hello and welcome to How Sencha is Made, Part 2. In Part 1, I talked about the cultivation and harvest of the raw leaves that go into making Sencha, and if you haven't seen that video, you can find it over here. But if you've already seen it, or you already know what happens, then today I'll be talking about how these raw leaves are processed and refined into the Sencha in your kyusu that you can drink, because it's tasty. The post-harvest production of Sencha can be mostly broken down into two main parts: the production of Aracha, which means crude or unrefined tea, and the process in which Aracha is converted into Shiagecha, which is finished or refined tea, and that's the type of tea that you usually drink in your cup. The production of Aracha must occur straight away after harvesting, as if you wait too long after picking the leaves, they'll begin to wilt and oxidize, and they won't be green tea. Oxidation is what separates green tea from oolong tea and black tea. It's a common misconception to think that black teas and oolongs are fermented instead of oxidized, but that is just a misconception. Fermentation involves bacterial or microbiotic cultures, and this is how you produce things like dark tea or pu'er. Oxidation is very much the same process as when you take a slice of an apple and let it sit out for too long and it goes a little brown. You don't want your green tea to go a little brown. To stop the leaf from oxidizing, most tea in Japan, Sencha included, is steamed. The steam breaks down the enzymes which are involved in oxidation and therefore keep the tea green. In contrast, the green teas from China, or some rarer types of green tea from Japan, like Kamairicha, are processed by heating them in a large pan or wok. This process of stopping oxidation is called sase in Japanese, or kill green in English, and is the first step in producing aracha, which doesn't make much sense because you're not killing or stopping the green, but that's what they call it. So to get the leaves to this step, you have to pick them up from the factory, load them into giant cloth bags, plop them on the back of a K-truck, and drive them to the aracha kobo, or aracha factory. These factories are usually located close to where the tea is harvested and are often shared by multiple farmers. Building the factories close to the farms makes the travel time from harvest to processing shorter, meaning there's less time for the tea to wither. Once the leaves reach the factory, they're weighed to see how much was harvested before being put into a large trough in which warm air is blown over the leaves to prevent them from drying out too quickly. They're then loaded onto conveyor belts and taken to the first step in the aracha process, jonetsu, or steaming. Steam. Historically, the leaves were steamed over some boiling water in like a little steamer basket, the same way you'd steam some dumplings, using some chopsticks to stir them around. But ever since the early 1900s, when industrialization came to the Japanese tea industry, there are some fancy machines that do this work for us. These take two major forms, either a conveyor belt, which carries the tea through a steaming chamber, or a rotating drum, which carries the leaves through a steaming chamber. In both methods, the angle of the drum or the conveyor belt can be adjusted to fine-tune how long the leaves stay in the steaming chamber. Steaming time has a massive effect on the final tea, and how long the tea is steamed for is determined by the condition of the leaves, the cultivar, and on what type of tea the producer wants to make. Generally speaking, steaming time can be broken down into three main categories. Asamushi, or light steaming. This is anywhere from like 7 to 20 seconds. Light steaming keeps the leaves very intact and preserves a lot of the origin characteristics of the tea leaves. This is used predominantly in really high-grade tea, especially from Uji and Shizuoka. Steaming for slightly longer, between 20 and 60 seconds, is called futsumushi, normal steaming. It's also called chumushi, or medium steaming. Defining things as normal can be a bit contentious, so time ranges vary a little bit depending on who you ask, but most senchas you'll drink are usually steamed somewhere around here. Steaming for longer than 45 seconds to a minute is often called Fukamushi, or deep steamed. This style of steaming is a little more recent, developed in the 1950s as a way to revitalize the Japanese tea industry following World War II. It was developed to be used on lower quality tea leaves grown on the plateau regions such as Makinohara in Shizuoka, and this is because steaming tea for this long causes the leaves to break down, releasing more pectin, and this results in a more round and less astringent cup of tea. The broken leaves also produce a more cloudy, vibrant green color in the cup, as opposed to the clear yellow of a classical sencha. These two things combined made this a very popular style of tea that helped the domestic tea industry in Japan boom into the 1970s. And today this is still a very common and popular type of tea. However, due to large-scale production issues, Fukamushi senchas can often be a little underwhelming and fall short of their promise of being round and less bitter. Because steaming can have such a drastic effect on the final tea, it is a very important and consequential part of the process. When we asked Yoshida-san what the most difficult part of running a tea farm is, this is what he said.
一番はスチーム、蒸す、それが一番ディフィカルト。蒸しで、全てが変わる。1年育てて、せっかく育ててもスチームをミスすると、
After steaming, the goal of Sencha production is to dry the leaves evenly while maintaining a temperature that's neither too hot or too cold, somewhere around 35 degrees Celsius, in order to prevent the tea from losing its color or aroma. To make sure the leaf dries evenly, it is rolled and kneaded to press out the moisture from the inside of the leaf to the outside where it can dry. Historically, Sencha was rolled and dried manually in a process called temomi, or hand rolling. If you put that into Google Translate, it might give you hand massage, which, while sounding nice, is not quite accurate. Temomi-cha, or hand roll tea, is still produced today in competitions and in very small quantities because it is very labor-intensive and time-consuming to produce. Instead, the vast majority of sencha is rolled and dried using a standard set of machines, which are modeled after the hand rolling process. Before I get into the details of this drying process, I'll have to introduce a slightly confusing concept: moisture content. In the Japanese tea industry, the moisture content of the leaves is expressed as a percentage of the dry matter in the leaves. For example, freshly picked tea leaves have a moisture content of 400%, meaning that the tea leaf is 4/5 water. 100% dry matter, 400% water. I know this is confusing, but this is what they use. With this concept in mind, let's move on to the first step in the rolling process, soju, or rough kneading. This step takes place in a large heated drum in which there are two types of spinning arms. The first is shaped kind of like a pitchfork, which scoops the tea up from the bottom of the drum and tosses it through the air so that the moisture on the surface of the leaves can evaporate and dry. After the tossed leaves fall to the bottom of the drum, the second type of arm, which is affixed with spring-loaded spatulas, presses them against the bottom of the drum, which is lined with bamboo slats. And here, the pressure from the spring-loaded spatula kneads the leaves against the bottom of the drum to even out the moisture content. The leaves are then picked up by the tossing arms again, and the cycle continues. As the leaves are freshly steamed, they're really quite moist at this stage, so the tossing arms also help to break down any clumps that form. During this step, keeping the kneading and the drying in perfect balance is the skill of the tea producer, and they achieve this by adjusting the speed of rotation and the temperature and volume of the hot air being blown into the drum. If this balance errs too much on the side of drying, the leaves will dry out unevenly and lose their freshness and vibrance. But if the leaves are kneaded too much and not dried enough, they'll become mushy. The tea is kept in this drum for about 40 minutes or until the moisture content is about 100%, meaning the tea is half water and half dry tea leaf matter. After this, the tea is moved on to the second step in the kneading process, junen, or kneading and rolling. In the previous step, most of the drying occurred from the blade of the leaf. So in this step, the primary goal is to squeeze the moisture out of the stems and petioles back into the vein of the leaf to even out the moisture content. As such, this is the only step in the process in which no heat is applied. Instead, the leaves are placed into a cylinder with little bristles on the bottom, and a weight is placed on top, and this entire cylinder is moved around in a circular motion over a ridged plate. When the tea producer adjusts all the parameters perfectly, such as the pressure of the weight on the top, the machine doesn't actually knead the leaves directly, but rather makes the tea leaves knead each other and cycle around, making sure all the moisture is spread out evenly. In addition to squeezing water out of the stems of the leaves, this step also squeezes out amino acids and brings those closer to the surface of the leaf, where they can be extracted more easily when brewing. Amino acids are what contribute to the umami and sweet flavors found in sencha. Now that the moisture and amino acids are distributed evenly throughout the leaves, they're ready to move on to the next step, chuju or chumomi, intermediate kneading or rolling. This step actually takes place in two separate machines, the first one being very similar to the machine used in soju, the first kneading stage. This time round, the goal is more or less the same: to break down the clumps, dry the tea, and further knead it to ensure that the moisture is even. The leaves spend around 10 to 15 minutes in this machine, or until the moisture content reaches around 75%, at which point they're transferred to the second machine in this step, which also looks very similar, except this time the drum also rotates at about half the speed of the arms, and there are no stirring arms, only pressing arms. And instead of the bamboo slats only being located at the bottom of the drum, this time they cover the entire inner surface of the drum. The pressing arms knead the tea leaves against this ridged surface with about 5 to 7 kilograms of pressure for another 30 to 50 minutes, until the leaves have a moisture content of around 32 to 35%. At this point, the leaves should be dry enough that they no longer form a clump when squeezed together in the hand. Once this condition is met, the leaves are ready to move on to the next and final step in the rolling process, known as seiju, or fine kneading. This final step is where the sencha leaves are given their distinctive needle-like shape, and to do so they're put into the most complicated machine we've seen so far, the seijuki. This complicated machine is designed to mimic the fine hand motions of the temamicha masters. There are a lot of moving parts to this machine, but the main section where the leaves sit is a ridged trough, which is heated with propane gas to around 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, or up to like 120 degrees Celsius, but that's on like the giant machines for large batches. On top of this, a weighted plate rolls the leaves back and forth in a reciprocating motion while applying gentle pressure. Any leaves that spill out are collected by an array of little brushes and put back into the trough. Like in the earlier kneading step, when this machine is calibrated properly, the leaves are mostly rolled against each other rather than against the machine itself. During this process, the tea producer is constantly adjusting the weight on the leaves, at first keeping it relatively light, allowing the tea leaves to align with each other in the same direction. Then after about 2 to 3 minutes, whoa, I'm slipping off the chair. Then after about 2 to 3 minutes, the weight is slowly increased, further forcing the leaves to align with each other and roll tightly against each other. At maximum pressure, the leaves are rolled for another 10 to 15 minutes. How and when the weight is adjusted depends on the personal preferences of the tea producer and also on the regional style. For example, in Kyoto, the weight is increased slowly over the course of kneading and concludes under maximum pressure. However, some producers in Kawane, Shizuoka prefer to rapidly ramp up the pressure before backing it off in the last 10 to 20 minutes. In either case, when this step is finished, the leaves have their distinctive needle-like shape and around 13% moisture content. The final step in Aracha production is drying. Here, the shaped leaves are placed into a dryer where hot air of around 75 to 80 degrees Celsius is blown over them for about 20 to 40 minutes. There are two types of tea dryers: the conveyor belt style or the shelf style. In either case, the tea is dried until it reaches between 4 and 5% moisture content. This is the industry standard for a number of reasons. Firstly, anything above 5% and the tea is at risk of spoilage. Anything under 4%, and some say this will cause the tea's quality to deteriorate during long-term storage. Additionally, this 4 to 5% moisture content is the agreed upon rule when trading Aracha on the wholesale market, and because Aracha is sold by weight, fudging this number can also mean fudging the weight of the tea, resulting in fraud. But now that the tea is dry and looks like classical sencha, it's ready for your kyusu. Just kidding, it's not. There's more steps. That's right, despite this really long and complicated process, and trust me, I've simplified things a little bit, this tea is not ready to be drunk. First, it must be refined to take out any of the stems or sticks or other foreign material that might have ended up in the leaves. As I mentioned earlier, this step is called shiage, or refining. In most cases, farmers don't actually sell the tea that they produce directly. Instead, they'll sell their aracha on the wholesale market to producers who will do the shiage in their factories. However, in some rare cases, the farmers also own a shiage factory. As I said, shiage is not nearly as standardized as the aracha production, but there are generally three main steps: sorting the tea, firing the tea, and blending the tea. But not necessarily in that order. Again, this is not standardized. Sorting the tea means taking out any unwanted stems or twigs, but also taking out any leaves that are considered off-grade. This grade is determined by the producer, so anything that's off-grade could be broken leaves, powder, or large pieces of old leaves that were accidentally harvested. Some small producers will do the sorting manually using handheld sieves, while larger producers will use really fancy high-tech machinery to optically or electrostatically sort out the stems from the leaves. This sounds complicated, and it is, and it's really cool, because they use a little camera to detect the stems and then send that information to a computer which determines a little air blower to shoot the stems out of the leaves as it falls over a little drop. Or the electrostatic one, I can just talk about that as well. It uses the difference in electrostatic properties between the stems and the leaves to static electricity the leaves away from the stems using high voltage differential. Also cool. Another step in the shiage process is firing, or hiire. This has two main purposes. The first being mostly practical, reducing the moisture content of the tea leaves from around 5% to less than 3%. This helps increase the shelf life of the tea at room temperature and means it can be sold in the shops. The second purpose is to set the final flavor of the tea, and this can be done by adjusting the temperature of the firing. Generally speaking, higher quality teas are fired at a lower temperature in order to preserve more of the origin characteristics and original flavor compounds present in the leaves, whereas lower quality teas are fired at higher temperatures to sort of round out any of the imperfections and create a more roasty, drinkable flavor profile. You can kind of think of this like specialty coffee if you were into that, with light roasts being more transparent and dark roasts being more roasty. In addition to quality, the strength of the firing will also depend on regional styles. For example, in Uji and the Kyoto area, teas are generally fired at lower temperatures of around 80 degrees Celsius and never higher than 100 degrees Celsius. Conversely, in areas like Yame and Kagoshima, which are known for their high-fired flavor profiles, the hiire will take place at much higher temperatures of around 120 or 130 degrees Celsius. This encourages the formation of these new roasty flavor compounds, such as pyrazines and pyrols. In addition to temperature, another variable that goes into firing is the heat source. Some producers use propane gas, others use hot air, and some use charcoal. Though this is quite rare, and I only know of one producer who still does this, Morisaki-san.
And then hiire nashi or just?
Sometimes I use I do heat but on very
low,
low temperature. I think 70 temperature, 70.
Hot air or gas or?
Actually,
Sumi. It's good.
I have a hoiro.
Oh,
Yeah.
like thermomi no hoiro.
Hand rolling thermomi hoiro. Yeah, so I put fire on charcoal. So I put another hoiro. Yes.
So you use the hoiro for hiire?
Here, yes.
The last aspect of shiage that we'll mention today is gogumi, or blending. In the case of single origin teas, obviously, there is no blending. However, the teas do generally go through the blending drum just to make sure that all the aracha is mixed evenly, especially if it's been sitting in cold storage for some time. But for most teas in Japan which are sold blended, aracha from various farms or harvests or from various cultivars will be mixed together in a big drum that will rotate and blend them all together to create a consistent mix. Only after all three of these steps have been completed is the tea ready to drink. Speaking of which, I need to brew more tea. If you've made it this far, through both videos or even just this one, congratulations! You now know how sencha is made. Let me know in the comments if this sort of technical information is exhausting, or if you crave more of it. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please hit like and make sure to subscribe if you want to see more tea videos of varying technical complication in the future. Thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and have a nice day. Bye-bye. Drink tea.